monthly talk story, our monthly talk story event. I'm Stan Liu. I'm one of the talk story directors with the 1882 Foundation, located in Washington, D.C. And we've been holding these talk story events monthly since originating in 2012. We began always being live here in Washington, D.C., Chinatown. But we went virtually and then online with the coronavirus pandemic. So beginning in March of 2020 until just recently, early this year, as a matter of fact, we started. Now we're doing a hybrid combination, live and online. We are streaming on Facebook and recording. So if you're not comfortable, those of you here, if you're not comfortable with being seen or heard, and those of you who are participating online, turn your camera off and participate in the chat box. The audience will be muted during the program, and afterwards, during the open discussion and question and answer session, audience members will be unmuted. To ask questions, hit the raise hand button or type in questions and comments in the chat box during the program and the open discussions. Our associates will be overseeing this to see that they are addressed by our moderator and presenters. We invite you to use the chat now to greet each other online and let us know where you're joining us from. The 1882 Foundation is dedicated to promoting, uncovering, understanding, and sharing our American stories. As I said earlier, Talk Story has been a regular feature in our DC AAPI communities since 2012. This is a gathering of our community, our friends, our allies, to share stories of our lives, heritage, history, hopes and ambitions, trials and tribulations. We found that the strength of our community lies in the power of the stories we share with each other. We invite you to partner with us through your participation and support. Our website is 1882foundation.org. I invite you to check into our website and see what we're doing. We have many partners and collaborators and co-conspirators, if you will. Some of them are OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates, the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, the DC Chinatown Service Center, and the Smithsonian Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage. And we thank our supporters, the Gold Properties, who own this building and operate this building, for providing the space for us today. They've been very generous with their gift of letting us use this space. And also I want to thank our logistical support team today, that helping with Mei Che, who's really a co-director with me on Talk Story events, and Alina and Amanda for helping us with setting up the program today and recording this. And I think remotely we have Gabby online here, so thank Gabby as well. So today we are very privileged to have an event entitled From Memories to Memoirs, Essential Elements of Memoir Writing. And it's a subject that's near and dear to my heart, about writing memoirs or reading memoirs about the story of our heritage. And we're privileged to have a good friend of mine leading the discussion, Veronica Li. She's, to me, she epitomizes what Asian American literature ought to be all about. She writes about the stories of Asian America, and I stress America, the American side of being Asian, and in all of her background stories that she writes. And she writes with a great deal of passion, emotion, And when I read her book, when I started doing my identity search, looking for my own identity or who I was, it's one of the first books I read. And I really was enraptured with how Veronica wrote this story with such passion. And it was very personal. It was a journey across 4 seas about the trip that her mother took to come to America. And and to me, I said it just epitomizes what I look for in Asian American literature, that speaks to the uniqueness of our community, what we go through, the understanding that she places in her writing. I just see the love that she had for her mother in that book. It just came out so thoroughly. I said, this is I got to get to know this woman, this author. And so I'm privileged that Veronica is my friend, and the 1882 Foundation sort of claims her as our writer in residence. We took her. So she's been very helpful to us in our programs and so forth. And she's always willing to help out when called upon. And she's here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Veronica, and she will introduce her husband and co-writer and the other participant speakers today.
Thank you very much, Stan. I remember a few years ago, you called me the writer in residence. I thought you were joking.
No,
but you're not. You mean it.
We stake that claim. So.
Thank you. So let me introduce to you the other speakers today. Sverrir Sigurdsson here is my husband. He will be talking about how he wrote his memoir, Viking Voyager, with some help from me. Sverrir grew up in Iceland and graduated as an architect from Finland. He pursued an international career in construction that took him to the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, and the US. He has worked for the international aid agencies, UNESCO, and the World Bank, which is where we met. And we are most honored to have Sabrina Hsu with us today. She is head of the Collection Services section of the Asian Division at the Library of Congress. And she's responsible for the Asian Division's collection of over 4 million rare and non-rare books, manuscripts, CDs and DVDs, and all kinds of artifacts from various parts of Asia. And she will tell us about some of the tools available at the Library of Congress for researching into family history. But first of all, Sverrir and I will talk about what we learned from writing our memoirs. Afterwards, we'll have Q&A and an exercise to help you jumpstart your memoir. First of all, did you know there's a difference between a memoir and an autobiography? A memoir focuses on one aspect of a life and offers the reader an in-depth exploration. For example, you had a great time in college and you want to write about it. Or it can be an ordeal that you went through. Or you may want to write about your relationship with your parents, and so on. You can have many memoirs about different aspects of your life. You can think of your life as a pie, the whole pie, and a memoir as a slice of that pie.
Whereas an autobiography is the whole pie. It is a person's life history and covers all the elements of his or her life. It's like a scrapbook in which pieces of life are pasted. It gives you room to discuss whatever is important to you, unlike a memoir where you need to stick to a certain subject.
Now, let me talk about the most important ingredient of a memoir. It is called the theme. The theme is an idea or message that pervades a work of art or literature. I will give you an example from my book, Journey Across the Four Seas. This book is a memoir about my mother's journey. And this is a picture of her when she was around 30 years old, taken in Nanjing. Isn't she beautiful? Some years ago, my parents moved from California to live with me in Virginia. They were both in their 80s. My mother loved to tell stories of her life. I thought it would be good to tape her stories for posterity. I had heard these stories many times in my life, but hearing them in chronological order was a revealing experience. A theme began to take shape. My mom had moved from place to place many times in her life. Sometimes the cost was external, such as war. When Japan invaded Hong Kong in 1941, she fled to China as a refugee. Other times, the cost was internal, such as my father's paranoia. And it's hard to blame him because he grew up in terrible times in Shanghai. He always thought disaster was around the corner and he would want to move before it happened. But I think at the bottom of her constant moving around, the reason was her childhood. My mother lost her father when she was very young. The family became so poor, they all had to cram into one bedroom. So this longing for a better home became the driving force behind many decisions in her life. So the theme was clear. It's my mom's search for home. And that's how she and the family ended up in the US.
My search for a theme is a long story, and I'll start from the beginning. This is my memoir, Viking Wiser, an Icelandic memoir. I was born in Iceland and grew up reading the Icelandic sagas, and many of them are about the adventures of my forefathers. So at a very young age, I wanted to travel. I guess this wanderlust is built into my Viking heritage. I left home at 19 to study in Finland, and after graduating, I decided to go on a 3-year plan to see the road before I went back to Iceland. 3 years turned into 60, slight extension. And I visited 60 countries and worked in about 30 of them. But I never completed my original plan, which was to wind up in Iceland. Life never follows a plan. When I told stories of my travel to my friends, their reaction was often, "Why don't you write your memoir?" So I started jotting down memorable recollections and saving them in a folder on my computer called it's like dumping photos into a shoebox. Then I showed a few snippets to Veronica, who had then published her memoir about her mother and other books.
Now, this was during his retirement. And after he's done everything he wanted to do, it was important that he had something to work on. So I was going to pat him on the back and say, "Great job, carry on." But after reading about 10 pages or so, I said to him, "Sverrir, you've really had an interesting life." I'd heard bits and pieces about his travels before, but I didn't realize how extreme they were until he connected the dots for me. And that was when I decided to help him turn his episodes into a book.
At the same time, we didn't want to write a travelogue. A good memoir should tell a story which reveals what or who the author is. What is his or her inner drive? In my case, the question was, what is the inner drive that makes me take on these extreme travels? What makes me a modern day Viking? So this became the theme of my memoir.
Now, after the theme, comes the storyline or the plot. It's the main events of a story presented by the writer as an interrelated sequence. I like to think of each episode as a building block for developing the theme. My mom had told me lots of anecdotes from her life. I had a hard time deciding which ones to use and which ones to throw out. The theme became my guide. It provides a framework to hang the anecdotes on. Those that were not relevant were taken out, while those that brought out her longing for a good home were ramped up. When describing incidents crucial to the theme, you have to slow down and develop the scene to the fullest. I will give you an example later.
You can be creative with your storyline. There is no formula for it. It can be in chronological order, or you can jump back and forth in time, or you can way back to the distant past in time before you were born. And this was how I started my story. My chapter 1, called The Sea, was about my grandfather on his last and fateful fishing trip. He was the skipper of a sailing fishing vessel, and his crew was made up of his oldest son and 6 other men from the village. That is literally a picture of his ship. They would be out in the North Atlantic for weeks at a time. Even in the so-called warm months, the weather was often blustery and stormy, and many fishermen lost their lives at sea. The reason I started my story with a distant past was I wanted to show I am who I am because of all the people who have paved the way for me. Life is a relay. Every leg is a continuation of the previous one, and I felt that to understand myself, I had to understand those who have gone before me. Now, at this point, let me tell you a bit about my research into family history. Since I am located in the US, I was worried that access to the material on my grandparents might be a challenge. As it turns out, all I needed was to push some buttons on my computer, and the internet spewed out some incredible information. I found very useful census data and newspaper articles. I also emailed the National Library of Iceland and got some help from them.
And if you live around Washington, D.C., count yourself very lucky. You can walk right into the Library of Congress, the world's largest library. But I always feel intimidated when I walk in. However, today we have Sabrina Hsu to take us by the hand and show us around.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm so honored to participate this event. Let me tell you some very brief steps. I don't know how many of you visit the Library of Congress, or how many you actually used the Library of Congress. Many of you visit Library of Congress, but actually you start using that collection. It's all free and it's easy. So Library of Congress is the largest library in the world. We have 170 millions of books, films, videos, and audio records, photographs, newspaper, manuscripts, and maps. It covers 470 languages within its collection. So those collection material served in 22 reading rooms inside of the Library of Congress' 3 buildings. So those reading room, it's all by formats or subject, such as photographs, maps, reading room, motion pictures, reading room, newspaper, serial reading room, also has main reading rooms. So the collection are constantly growing, and the material was acquired through all the U.S. agencies, copyrights deposit, also from all over the world. Every day we have about 22,000 items every day comes to the library to be processed. The main reading room, which is located at the Jefferson Building, is a principal point to gain the access for libraries' 22 millions of books and periodicals. So this division also include a microfilm and electronic resource center. It periodically provides 90 minutes the research orientations. So we also, you can also come to this main reading room to use the 56,000 volumes of reference book. It's all, you can just walk around and get all those reference books by yourself. So Library of Congress, it's open freely to everyone or about 16 years old. So if you are about 16 years old, you can walk to the Library of Congress with your identification card. About 20 minutes, you will get the reader's registration card. It's good for 2 years. And after 2 years, you can renew. It's all free. You could spend about 10 to 20 minutes. You can easily get this card. And you can access all 22 reading rooms by using this card to retrieve or request our not 170 millions book, but quite a lot of millions of materials books. It's all free. So next page. So the local history and genealogy reference service is located inside of the Research Reference Service Division. Library of Congress is one of the world's largest primary collection of the U.S. and foreigner genealogical and local history publications. So we have 50,000 compiled family histories and over 100,000 U.S. local histories. All those, compiled with publications, vertical files, digital collections, and electronic resources. So people may ask, what's the vertical files? So those vertical files, it's not being cataloged yet. So if you are search online, I'm sorry, you cannot find all those information, but it's a freely access if you in person come to the main reading room. And those files, it was arranged by specific family names to the states, towns, and cities of the U.S. and to genealogical research in general. Include a draft of letters written by reference librarians, pamphlets, and other materials donated to the library, such as magazines and newspapers, clips, so newsletters and brochures. It's all kinds of materials you could use. So we also recent year, we speed up our digital collection. So you could go to the Library of Congress website to access the our digital collections. Those include the newspapers, maps, photos, and personal papers of national figures. We also have electronic resources. So those is online subscribed databases of newspapers, journals, books, magazines. Just for local history and genealogy, we have a 52 subscribed database freely accessed by you. If most it's in person, on-site only. So you have to be on-site the library building. You could use all those databases, 52 databases just for local history and genealogy. So talk about Chinese. So, we have a Chinese origin of U.S. families, a guide to local history and genealogy source web page. You could access at home or anywhere. Just click this link. So there's a lot of information and the resources was prepared by the reference librarian in the past. So there's a lot of information. We will have a question afterwards. Is it right?
Can you hold it, Ted?
Yeah. Okay. So recently, I put one of the on-site only databases. Recently, we subscribed My China Roots. This is the database. It's a growing database of the overseas Chinese records, include the Chinese family tree books, 族谱, and immigration records, the overseas Chinese. So directories and association records. So you can see it's all. This is one of the database we subscribe to, but it's used. You have to go to the on-site to use those databases. Yeah. So I think that's it. We can have a question.
Okay, Ted. What's your question?
Okay, so is this My China Roots the one that's based in Beijing and London? That's just very quickly. It's not, you didn't create this.
No. This is a private company. We subscribe.
But if you give me an example, so if I give you an example right now, what do I need if I'm looking for the Gong job? How do I start? Do I look up GONG or do I look up?
You could search. This database is just started, so it's not a lot of information. They collected the information from the publications, digitized. So they digitized and some overseas records, like lending records. They got information from obituaries. So they are still adding more. This is not a Library of Congress's database. We just subscribe.
So if I want to start,
yeah, you can
I just
search.
put down a surname and see what happens.
Yeah, you can search. There's but you have to go on site of
Your library.
Yeah, Library of Congress. You have to go to, or you could subscribe yourself. Then you have to pay a fee to access those, because this is a commercial. This is not a Library of Congress's owned database. So we subscribed. You can use it for free if you are on site.
Apparently, there is a lot of interest in the subject. Yeah. But we can tackle them in the Q&A in more detail. And thank you so much, Sabrina. The information was so useful.
Hope everyone come to visit us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we will carry on with the art of memoir writing. Okay, let's talk about the essential elements of a plot. When you read a novel, you expect these elements. The hero of the story faces a problem, he struggles, and the story ends with revelation and resolution of the problem. And in the meantime, the hero has grown older and wiser, and he is not the same person as when the story started. A memoir should also have these elements. A memoir tells a story too. The only difference is that the characters in the story are real and the happenings are real too. Now, here are some other techniques to make your memoir powerful and exciting. Place readers in the scene, or better still, in your shoes, by providing details of physical surroundings and the emotional journey the character is going through. My first book is a spy thriller set in Somalia, where I used to work. I went to great length to lay out the details. I described the landscape in Somalia, the weather, the people, the streets, and so on. I carefully planned the plot, built up tension and climax. But when I was writing my mom's memoir, I didn't do any of that in my first draft. The reason was I was mostly transcribing what my mother told me, which was, I did this and I did that. Then I showed a draft to an editor. Her comment was that my mother's life was very exciting, but the way it's told as an account doesn't do it justice. She pointed out that for a memoir to be convincing and absorbing, it has to have all the ingredients of a novel. So during the rewrite, I pretended I was writing a novel. The facts were given. I didn't alter them, but I did go back to my mother to ask for more details. I am going to read you a scene that I fleshed out because it's very important to the theme. My mom's father was a trader from Shantou, and he traveled among cities in China and Southeast Asia. He died of pneumonia far away from his home in Hong Kong when he was only 33 years old. He had another home with another wife and children back in his hometown in China. He was buried in his hometown, and my mom and her side of the family went there for a memorial service a year later. My mom was 4 at the time. This was the first time she realized her father was dead and her life wouldn't be the same. This was when her search for a home began. This is my mother speaking. I watched with curiosity the goings-on of the memorial. Monks circled the altar, chanting like one person, singing in many voices. Their heads were shaved like little boys, and as they moved around, their yellow robes rose and fell like waves. People filed in, bowing to Father's portrait and shaking incense at him. When my turn came, Mother nudged me toward the altar. She had taught me what to do. Clasp the incense in both hands, away from my eyes, and make 3 deep bows. But as I stood in front of the altar, her instructions left me. Father's eyes gripped mine. The chanting and wailing faded into the distance. Father and I were the only people in the room. We were face to face, chatting quietly. I told him I wanted to touch him, his open face, strong square jaws, and shock of black hair. He said he wanted to touch me too. It had been a long time since he'd done that. I told him to come back from Bangkok or Shanghai or wherever he was. He thought about it for a while. Then he replied with a look so sad that even a 4-year-old could grasp the message. Take a bow, Mother hissed at me. My body bent over slowly and deeply. A teardrop stained the fabric of my shoe. For the first time, I understood what the crying was about. My father was never coming back. My father was dead. Now, this is a life-changing event for my mom. Because of that, I wanted to lay out the scene as if it was happening in real time. My mom was only 4 then. It was amazing how much she remembered. But of course, there were a lot of gaps in her memory. So I took the bits and pieces that she remembered, and I used my imagination to weave them together into a scene. This is called creative license, and we'll talk more about it later.
In my memoir, the day I left home was crucial to my Viking career, which is the subject of my story. It's like a Viking's maiden voyage, because this trip is so important, I try to take the readers along with me on the plane ride to Finland, where I was going to study architecture. To bring readers along with me, I tried my best to capture the ups and downs of my trip. Let me read what I wrote. On the day of departure, reality pulled my soaring spirits back to earth. My flight was delayed. When I finally boarded the plane 2 hours behind schedule, my stomach was churning with worry. And my fears came true. I missed my flight to Copenhagen. I nervously approached an SAS staff, and to my relief, she understood my textbook Danish. My best high school scores were in Danish, but I had never used it on a real Dane before. Without ado, the attendant put me on my cardboard suitcase on a plane bound for Stockholm with a connection to Finland. Communicating in Swedish in Stockholm was somewhat more demanding because I had never taken any lessons in that language. I had only picked it up studying physics in a Swedish textbook, but in the end, it worked just fine. With a ticket in hand, my spirits were soaring again until I settled into my seat on the plane. Everyone around me was speaking a language that sounded like gibberish to me, and I couldn't pick out a word, not even a prefix or suffix that shared a common root with any other language I had encountered. Even the dress code of the passengers seemed alien. The women were draped in long, colorful skirts, and the men sported flamboyant vests and jackets. I had no idea at the time that they were gypsies.
So as you can see, providing details about the physical surroundings is important, but equally important is the emotional journey going on inside the character. I think Sverrir has something to say about that.
Oh, yes. While we were writing the book, Veronica kept asking me how did I feel about this and that. I found it very annoying. For example, when I was 12, my mother came down with polio. And I was just going to state the facts, which are my mother had polio and her legs were paralyzed. How did I feel about that? Well, of course, I couldn't have felt good about it, but it was such a long time ago. How could I remember? But Veronica prodded me for details of how I took care of my mom. And I dug into my memory and found that I did remember certain things. And so we put together the following scene. I was devastated. My mother, my strong, take charge mother, became helpless as a baby. Her leg muscles were paralyzed. The doctor visited regularly, but there was no cure for polio. The only treatments were time, hope, and love. Everyone in the family pitched in, and since I attended school in the afternoon, this was my last year in primary, I was mom's nurse in the morning. I did the daily grocery shopping, lugging home a pail of milk in one hand and in the other a whole fish thread on a wire through the ice. I cleaned and gutted the fish, cut it into steaks, and boiled it together with potatoes. Before I left for school, I shared with Mom the lunch I had cooked. She ate in bed while I sat on a chair, munching glumly by her side. Mom often apologized for being a bother to us. Other than that, she said little, her lips clamped tight and thin. Dad and Gusta took over when they came home in the afternoon, and Christian, then 5, was left to his own devices much of the day. My mother was not, if not determined. Gradually, she got out of bed and took one baby step after another, hanging onto furniture and walls. We were all rooting for her in our hearts, but our stoic culture frowns on any outpouring of emotions. However, I'm sure that our silent cheering didn't go unnoticed. Mom pushed ahead. After about 6 months, she could walk again. Our mother was back, cooking, cleaning, taking care of everyone as before, except we knew she would never be the same. She tired easily and could no longer go hiking with us.
I think that's a very touching scene. It's not gushing with emotions, but it is no less powerful. It also reveals the family dynamics and the stoic, reserved nature of Icelanders. Now, let's go on and talk about creative license. These are embellishments or sometimes deviating from the facts to create artistic effect. And the purpose is to bring out the true heart of the story, not to distort it.
In Viking Voyager, I bent the facts by changing the timing of 2 similar road trips from Kuwait to Iran. Both were important, but it was rather tedious to present the trips back to back. For artistic reasons, I delayed the timing of the second trip in the book.
Creative license, we have to remember, is not lying. Is not lying about what happened. Some memoir writers have been caught making up events that never happened and people who don't exist. That kind of writing should be called fiction, not memoir. Dialogue is another form of creative license. Nobody remembers word for word what somebody said 50 years ago. But if we remember the point the person made, we can recreate the quote. It livens the story when we can hear the voice of the person speaking. And here's an example from my mom's story. Back when she was a child, Chinese girls were not supposed to go to school. But she got lucky because a family friend was a school teacher and got her enrolled in a Chinese medium school. Later on, at the age of 13, my mom applied to a famous school in Hong Kong called Italian Convent, which was an English medium school. Since Hong Kong was a British colony then, learning English was essential for getting ahead. I will read you the interview my mom had with the principal, Mother Angelica. This is my mom speaking. After studying my report card, the nun said, "Do you have an English name?" I understood that much English to reply, "No." The nun scribbled on a slip of paper and handed it to me. "Flora," she said slowly, "this is your name." Mother Angelica went on speaking in the incomprehensible language. From her friendly manner and the name she gave me, I guess I'd been accepted. I reported to class the following Monday. The week went by without anyone acknowledging my presence. The homeroom teacher, a Portuguese woman, called everyone's name except mine. I wanted to ask her about it, but that would mean using my meager English. I fretted a long time before getting up the courage. "What's your name?" she said. I rummaged in my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper on which the nun had written my name. "Flora Li," she exclaimed. "I've been calling your name all week, and you didn't respond." The truth was, I didn't recognize my name. And by the way, my mom would eventually fight her way into Hong Kong University, which is, back in the 1930s, a very unusual thing. Now, we will talk about historical context. A person doesn't exist in a vacuum. A person's life is like a peephole. A closer look through the peephole will give you a much larger picture. Your story becomes so much richer if you bring out this big picture. Sometimes you can't help writing about historical events. My mother's life, for example, is so intertwined with Chinese history. She's like a walking history book. On December 8th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Hong Kong, and my mom fled to mainland China. And the morning of December 8th in Asia is the afternoon of December 7th in the US because of the time difference. And December 7th, 1941 is Pearl Harbor. And then from there on, my mom lived through a very turbulent period in Chinese history. After the war, communists took over China and she had to flee again. And eventually she decided the most stable place to raise a family was the US.
I have my war stories too. May 10, 1941, British warships sailed into the harbor of Reykjavik and invaded Iceland. This was after Hitler had taken over Denmark and Norway, and the Allies were worried that the Germans would take over Iceland as well and use it as a stepping stone on their way to North America. Now, if you look at Iceland, there in the middle of, you can see how it can be used as a stepping stone. And that was actually what some in America worried about.
Yeah, this is Europe over here, and then Iceland, and then here is North America.
I was 1 year old at the time. So the first 5 years of my life was spent in a war zone. I thought war was normal. And this is a very important part of my personal story, and it's also an important part of my country's story. Ever since the world recognized the geopolitical importance of Iceland, it has it has quickly developed from a dirt poor nation into a prosperous one. In the second half of my memoir, where I write about my Viking adventures, I try my best to bring out the recent history and culture of the places I was in. The chapters about my studies in Finland describe the courage and the resilience of the Finns during their wars with Russia, very much like what is happening today in Ukraine. In Africa, where I lived and worked for 6 years, I wrote about life in two newly independent nations, Malawi and Swaziland. They represent the new post-war order, which was built on the principle of self-determination for all people. Colonialism became a thing of the past, and in the few decades after the Second World War, 50 new countries were created in Africa alone.
And here is one more element of memoir writing. It's introspection. That's to look into yourself, to examine your motives, values, why you did what you did. If you don't look into yourself, it's very easy to fall into the trap of blaming everything that went wrong on somebody else. And my mom was like that when she was being taped. She blamed every mishap on my dad. So I sneaked up on her. Usually it was when we were doing something together, like cooking. She wouldn't be talking into a tape recorder, so she would feel freer to say things. During these conversations, she would be willing to admit her own weaknesses. This fairness is very important because otherwise the reader wouldn't trust her. They'll see her as vindictive, trying to get even with her husband.
I'm afraid Veronica forced me to do my share of soul searching. I was going to dismiss my former wife as crazy and not discuss her again in my memoir, but Veronica pointed out that my ex was had been married to me for 20 years and was definitely played a role in my Viking career. Now, as you can imagine, this was a pretty thorny subject. Veronica and I talked about it and decided to devote a chapter to describe in a sympathetic way who my ex is and where she came from. I also looked into myself and my own shortcomings and acknowledged the strain of our nomadic lifestyle on the marriage.
And this takes me to the subject of writing about living people. This is a sensitive issue because you don't want to offend anyone. Most of all, you don't want to be sued. Since we're not lawyers or experts on the subject, I will refer you to a book written by Judith Barrington, who is a well-known author and writing teacher. Her book, Writing the Memoir, shown here, has an appendix called Your Memoir and the Law. She gives you advice on what precautions to take to avoid getting sued by somebody you wrote about. There's also a useful article written recently and more up to date. This is, you can find it on the link, janefriedman.com, and she has been reporting on the book industry for many years. Basically, the advice from the experts is that you have to ensure what you've written is accurate, balanced, and serves your story. They also say the chances of you being sued are extremely small. That's one piece of good news. The main reason is it's very expensive to bring a lawsuit against somebody. But still, you better get your facts straight and be able to identify the source of your information. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to worry about lawsuits because of my mom's memoir, because many of the people she talked about were already dead. The people I had to worry about were family members, especially my dad, and he was still very much alive when the book came out. I couldn't let him read my mom's complaints about him. So I just didn't tell him there was such a book. But I also had to worry about my siblings. There are 5 of us, and the leader of the gang is my big sister, Agnes. I was smart enough to involve her in every step of the writing process. So when the book came out, Agnes approved and nobody dared object. Actually, the book is a catharsis for the family. We all knew there was something wrong with my dad. We just didn't want to admit it. In spite of his problems, he was a very good father. We also knew that our mother was the pillar of the family, and we're all very grateful to her. The book is a tribute to her.
One living person I had to worry about was my ex. Fortunately, she lives in Sweden and decides, so what if she reads it? If she wants to give a different account, she can write her own memoir. The other people I have to worry about are my 2 children. When my son was visiting me from Sweden, he went over my manuscript and gave me positive feedback. My daughter, however, was rather upset about the book. She was very young when her mother and I divorced, so she didn't know all the gory details. Now she knows, and we are still very good friends.
If we haven't said enough to inspire you to write your memoir, let us tell you about the rewards we got from writing them. When my parents moved in with me, my mom was a bitter person. And I was shocked because the mother I knew was gentle and kind and cheerful. What happened to her? I began to understand as I started recording her stories. She was a graduate of Hong Kong University, often called Harvard of the East. She could have gone far. But in those days, there weren't many jobs for women. And after she started a family, she had to stay home to take care of the children. My father was another burden she had to bear. She sacrificed so much for the family. And now at the end of her life, she felt she had nothing to show for herself. A big change came over her after the memoir was published. She even presented it to the world at a local library. Here she is. She was 88 years old and still going strong. Ever since the book came out, I hadn't heard her say one bad word against my dad. I think it's because she finally got the recognition she deserved. But the people who benefited the most, I would say, is the clan, what I call the clan. This picture was taken 30 years ago. My mom turned 70 then. Here she is. And this is my dad. And these little ones here, this is the first ABC generation in our clan. They are now grown-ups and parents themselves. So the second ABC generation has arrived. And if they want to find out where they came from, all they have to do is read their great-grandmother's memoir.
For me,
Do we have time? I think
No,
we
okay,
better cut this
okay.
short.
Yeah.
Yes, because we still have the exercise to go through. So on this note, we will conclude our presentation. We will now show you an exercise to jumpstart your memoir. And after that, we'll have Q&A. Okay. So first of all, you have to decide on the focus of your memoir. What do you want to write about? For those who already know what you want to write about, this may be a little bit redundant, but I think it will help you sharpen your storyline. So the first step is to identify major turning points in your life. A turning point is a point at which there's a change in the direction of your life. It's usually a momentous and memorable event. It's also dramatic and it sucks the reader in. So such a milepost is a good place to start your story. So next step is to decide which turning point you want to write about this year. And once you have decided, write 1 to 2 paragraphs about that event. Now, I will use my own life as an example of turning points in my life. The first one is I immigrated to the US at 15. Now, that was huge. And then a few years later, I went to college at Berkeley. That was huge too. I was totally transformed from a prim and proper Chinese girl. I became a hippie.
What year was that?
1969.
Vietnam War.
Vietnam War, right? And then somewhere in the middle, I would call this midlife. I went through a midlife crisis. And I quit my job to become a writer. So this is what I will write about. So once you have this, once you have done the previous exercise, you can draft an outline. So the turning point, I have decided on a turning point. I will start with that story, which is I did a calculation and I decided I could afford to quit my job to become a writer.
We figured out that sitting in front of the computer with our expenses and income, we had $1 over at the end of each month. So fine, we were okay.
I'm going to do it. Then after the turning point, after I start the story, with the turning point, I have to go back to the backstory. Who am I? What are the events of my past that led to the turning point? And then I have to go forward It's the aftermath. It's this part here. What happened after I decided to become a writer? What problems did I face? And what did I do to overcome them? What revelation did I have from the experience? Well, at the end of the exercise, you would have an outline for your story. And this outline is according to chronological order. This is just one way of doing it. You may want to organize your story differently, such as jumping back and forth in time. But it's always good to have a timeline, which is like a roadmap. No matter how you change the order of the events, you won't get lost because you have a roadmap. So now,
We have told our
shall
story.
we, yeah,
So
shall we
let's
start our Q&A and see what you guys think?
okay,
Is it
Okay.
Stan.
other stories?
Okay, you think it would have been easier to write a novel, so that you're not so caught up with what's actually factual and presented as a novel. That way you won't get sued or anything. It's all slowly fictional, but still based on, I mean, is that I've often thought about that if I'm going to do my story. And, my memory's not that good about what happened to me. So would it be better, safer, if you will, to write a novel and sort of present it as fiction?
There are pros and cons to both. My book, Confucius Says, which is about caregiving for parents, is a very thinly disguised memoir. I wrote it as a fiction because I didn't want to involve talking about my siblings who did what and who didn't do what for my parents, stuff like that. So I turned it into a novel. However, a publisher or an agent will tell you a memoir sells better than fiction. Now, there's this guy, I forget his name. He wrote 1 million little pieces about his rehab, drug and alcohol rehab in a home. And at first he wrote it as a novel and he was selling it to the publishers and nobody wanted it. And then he changed it and said, oh, this is a memoir. And it got bought up and became a bestseller and Oprah Winfrey book club thing and all that. But later on, when reporters started digging into the story, found out that he was telling outright lies. He was talking about events that never happened. And then he had a girlfriend that never existed. And so on. And then eventually, he couldn't deny it. He was denying it at first. And when he couldn't, he said, well, when I was telling the story as a fiction, nobody wanted it. I wrote it as a fiction. But when I said it's a memoir, it became a bestseller. So what can I do? So you have to make your own choice.
But you say memoirs are more sellable than fiction?
Yep. I think it's because people are nosy. People want to know what other the private secrets of other people.
Even if you're not famous.
Hmm?
Even if you're not famous.
Even if you're not famous, even if you're not famous, we are pretty much alike as people, what we go through in our lives. And I like to read about memoirs, how other people cope with things. And memoir has become a very popular genre. The current Nobel Prize winner, Annie Ernaux, is French, and she's a memoir writer. She's written, dozens of memoirs, all about her own experience, about her own life.
And by the way, these days it has become much easier to write a memoir write a book of any kind. There are many ways of doing that didn't exist, let's say 10, 20 years ago. But at the same time, because then now everybody is jumping on the bandwagon to write a book or a memoir, it is much more difficult to get it published and sold. So there are pros and cons.
So the memoir for you is your mother's story, not your story.
Yeah.
So I am planning to do, I've written one on my grandmother and I have one for my mother, but there's it's all one-sided, right? Because the stories I hear from my mother. Dead people can't sue me, right?
It's very difficult to sue from a coffin.
Oh, no, but the children of the dead person, could they sue you? They
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, they can. They can. Fortunately, none of my my relatives, because my mom was very critical of my grandfather, her father-in-law. Fortunately, nobody from that side of the family had any trouble with it. Besides, you don't have to worry forever. There is a statute of limitation for suing. It varies from state to state. In some states, it's 1 year. Some states, it's 3 years. So 1 to 3 years. 1 to 3 years after the publication of your book. After that, you cannot be sued.
Well, so my situation is even more complicated because the story is set in Singapore. Does that make it easier for me not to be sued?
Yeah.
Does it?
Oh, I don't know. Somebody from Singapore suing
Well,
you?
my family's Singapore, and the story is set in Singapore.
The story is set in Singapore.
I think the danger of being sued is actually somewhat overblown, unless you have actual malice. I mean, the person suing you has to show that you are writing with actual malice towards the subject. And unless you are doing that, it would be unlikely that anybody would be suing.
And for somebody from Singapore to sue you,
It'll be
I
very
don't
expensive,
know.
right?
Yeah, very expensive. And I have
Because
no
they're
idea how it
published
can
here,
be done.
though. They're published here.
Yeah.
Then they'll have representation here too.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, it would be very, very complicated. I have family in Bangkok too. My mom talked about them. Theoretically, they can object to something, but
Yeah, but I
Okay.
noticed in some writing, it's like the child's perception of this, right? The child's perception of this, which is negative towards the other person. But as the book goes through, the child resolves that there is another view from there and understands the child that what he saw at first is not what it came to be at the end.
Yeah.
Which is, the aftermath, the turning point, and the things that happened that gave that impression. And then later realize there's more to what we see and understand as children.
I would not say call that libel.
So did both of you get a lot of criticism or negative comments from family and friends that you misrepresented them, or they're not going to sue you, but they're unhappy with your depiction in the book?
I didn't receive anything negative from either my siblings or relations from anywhere. And there's an uncle who was mentioned, and he talked to me. He read the book. No objection whatsoever.
I
So
had a letter from quite a few years after the book was published. I had a letter from my former sister-in-law, and she claims that I was libeling her father.
She was
That
yeah,
my former father-in-law.
yeah. This is from somebody in Finland. She's now in Sweden.
She's in Sweden. They lived in Finland at the time, and this was during wartime. And what I write in the book is based on my wife's stories she told me. Now, my ex was old enough to remember war events in Finland. Her younger sister is too young to remember. So her stories are based on what people told her. What I suspect is that this was a family secret, that my father-in-law had basically left the country during the war and came back after the war.
That he was a draft dodger.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right.
And he
That's
got that
good.
information from his ex-wife. And as we went through that, I said, oh, what we should have done was you shouldn't outright have said that he
That he left Finland. I
Yeah.
should have said my
Oh,
ex.
my ex.
She told me.
my
Yeah, but
ex
voting
coach.
line,
There was no. What I suspect may have happened after this was that the two sisters actually talked, and the older sister, my ex, told the younger sister, "Yes, this is what happened."
Yeah.
I'm just surmising.
Yeah, but we were not worried for a moment that there would be a lawsuit. I mean, they live in Sweden, and it's been a few years after the book came out that somehow she got a hold of it. We never thought anybody in Sweden would read it.
Wow.
No. But I think it will always hang over your head, especially, talking about friends and family. But I think lawsuit the threat of lawsuit is overblown.
How much time did each of your books take to subscribe?
Sorry?
How much time?
did you take to?
Oh,
When did you start taping your mother?
I take my mom's stories. Well, it's kind of over a year, whenever we felt like it, I would take her stories. And then I had to transcribe it, and then go through editing. And then I rewrote the whole thing, more editing. Okay, the whole writing process, maybe including the taping, was about 3 years. And then after that, finding a publisher. Oh, no, actually finding a publisher was easy this time because I had a small press guy who published things on Asia. So that was not difficult for that particular book. But usually finding a publisher is another, I don't know, 2-3 years. So the writing process itself, from the taping, I would say 3 years.
I would say in my case, it was quite a bit longer because I didn't really start the process by thinking about necessarily writing a book. What I wanted to have some record of where I had been and what I had doing at different times of my life. And it was, I would say, about 5 years it took me to actually begin to pull these things together, and then Veronica looking at it. And then as an additional wrinkle, I actually translated it into Icelandic. It is published as a traditional book in Iceland. And that was another year for that. So it's a pretty lengthy process. Or can be. We are not like these people who are looking at current events with Donald Trump being sued, and therefore to write a book which is coming out next month. So.
About getting stories from families or friends. I think particularly in Asian culture, it's hard to get those stories out sometimes. Either it's too painful or this is my family, it's difficult to extract that information sometimes. I know you mentioned your mom's kind of open with that, but I imagine it's not uncommon for people to be kind of unwilling to talk about their stories. Do you have any tips or advice or suggestions on getting them to open up more to get that info?
Oh, okay. I'm just very, very lucky. My mom just loves to talk about her life. She is a very unusual person. Whenever something happened to her, a day or two later, she would tell a story about it. And then she would tell it a few more times, and it would finally be like it's been written down, because every time she tells it, it's verbatim, it's the same. So it's like she's reading from a piece of writing. So she has all these ready-made stories, and she was just spewing out when I was tape recording her. Now, if she were not like that, how would I coax her into it? I'm not sure if I would be telling these very personal stories and opinions to anyone, not even, I would definitely not tell it to my son. So what do you think? How would you coax a person into talking about personal,
I don't know.
private experiences?
In my case, I take myself for not literally asking my parents about their experiences. I mean, what I write in the book about their life is basically based on little anecdotes that they told me and have stuck with me. The one story that sort of fortuitously I got in enormously great detail was when I realized that the National Library of Iceland had interviewed my uncle, who was actually supposed to be on this last fateful trip with my grandfather when he and his oldest son. This uncle of mine was the next oldest. He was supposed to be on the ship, but because he had to take a leaver certificate in education, he survived. And then the Library of, not Congress, but Iceland, interviewed him about life for a seafaring person in Iceland during the turn of the previous century. It's a 5-hour discussion. I sit in front of my computer and listen to my uncle
Yeah.
as if he were alive today, telling stories about his life.
Yeah. But the first thing to do, I would say, under your circumstances, maybe to just ask. If you have older relatives, and you want to find out about their experiences, ask.
When did you go to school? Where were you when something happened? What were you doing?
I think people are flattered if others want to know about their personal lives. They think it's important where you went to school, and how you came to America and things like that. Show your interest and make the time.
Write it down.
Make the time to chat with people, with your elders. And then once you've done that, write it down, because you're bound to forget. If the person is willing to talk into a tape, a recorder, that'd be great. If not, I know somebody who was taking care of her mother, who doesn't like to talk about her life. But then when she was very sick, and my friend was by her bedside and asked her questions, and she would talk. And she would talk about anything that was asked. And then, of course, my friend couldn't be writing it down while she was talking. So every night, after the mother went to bed, she would go to her table and start typing in what she learned that day.
I was asked to write little short stories, vignettes about members of the Icelandic American Association in DC. And I did that basically through a phone. This was during COVID. This was just during having a phone a discussion, I would say, rather than interview. Writing it down, trying to make it into a coherent story, and then go back to that person and say, there's a gap here, and can you please explain a bit more here? And that turned out to be a pretty good way of pulling out people's stories.
Anyway, I think our time is up. I think Ted would like to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you so much. A lot of insights.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for listening.
How do you just how do you do it? And there are so many ways to do it, just by asking, just by doing that, just listening at the dinner table. Oh, that's so but so yeah. Always so good to see you. And Sabrina is such a great friend too. But the beginning of the stories, that's the whole thing about what 1882 Foundation is, storytelling. And storytelling is listening to other people tell their stories. And so many situations, you can ask directly about it. You can listen to them when they come to certain periods in their life. You can sit there at a dinner table. I think some of the best stories that you hear from Chinatown is when these guys get together and start sharing. Oh, hey, wasn't it like when we used to play basketball out in the street and things like that? And you just sit there, listen, and find out what's going on. And so that's what we want to do. Sabrina, did you want to say a few words? Oh, and before I do anything, do we have any questions from the website? Are you this one? Okay. Sabrina, you want to say a few words, final?
I still have to, but I was just say I found my parents, it's kind of so late. My father passed away, but I found it that made me so shocked. There was a lot of stories. So yeah, that's another way. If they write some newspaper or notes, you can collect the story. Very.
And one thing is, if you miss the chance to get the stories from your parents, you can start. You can be the person to leave the stories for your descendants.
This year, we actually have little giveaways, right? So thank you so much for presenting.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Oh, great. Stay positive. That's negative. Oh, I love it. Very, very timely.
A new process we have. We're actually giving a little prize for people to come speak here. And one for you.
Thank you. Looking at this, this is exactly the right size for what I love in public. This will be one of my
It
favorites.
says stay positive, test negative.
Okay, the same thing. Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
So again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you all for coming. I think everybody in the audience.
Thank you.
Introduction. And spend a little bit of time. We've always tried to spend a little bit of time, although it's getting a little bit late. And then I'm conscientious of our property owners here offering the space for us, and they have some. I got this back there. They'll arrest me or something like that. But next, again, thank you so much. Veronica is almost like our author in residence. Right? Okay.
We all have.
Okay. All right. So next, we have a couple of talk stories coming. One hasn't been really announced yet. That's for the 29th. So everyone sort of mark that date. It'll be in this room, and there'll be again some issues about going through the front door. Try to come in. We're having the director from the Angel Island Immigration Station coming. His name is Ed Kaporn. And we also have a director curator from the Ellis Island Immigration Station coming. And his name is Stephen Learning. And they'll both be here in person, and they'll be having a conversation about the history and the differences and between Angel Island immigration processing and Ellis Island immigration processing. So that should be very interesting. Most people see Ellis Island as the welcoming place with the Statue of Liberty giving you floor and all that. And Angel Island is very different. It's designed to keep out Chinese immigrants and so forth. So that history of those two things, of these two people talking about its history and policy, that should be very interesting. It would be live. Come on in live and also sort of live stream. And so I hope you can bring your friends over and come. These guys are coming, like I said, from New York and San Francisco for the day. The following week, what else do we have coming up? May, we have.
No, but that was all.
What?
No, my stuff.
We're going to have very exciting presentations from our interns, so we'll get a young perspective in June and July and part of August.
Yeah. July, we have, we actually are working with CAMDC, Chinese American Museum. And on July 17, 18, we will having Mei Ngai and a couple of other people, historians, talking about genealogy searches and so forth. So that's why I was trying to get the information from you first. So we'll be talking about Canadian immigration as well as China American immigration. That's July 17th. That's going to probably be at CAMDC, and that will probably be a hybrid presentation as well.
The Kennedy Center.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. We have a presentation at the Kennedy Center. The Kennedy Center's the Reach section, right? It's part of the Cultural Caucus program, which the Kennedy Center has put together, made up of community organizations that present cultural events or so forth. We did one in March, and that was on the immigration policy. This one is going to be very interesting. We're going to try to get, it's going to be, I kind of build it as a marketplace where you have interactive storytelling. And we're going to have people talking about lion dancing, and not just the lion dancing, the show. Wong people and other people will be demonstrating how does the lion actually work? How do you steps, whether the drumming and so forth like that, and drumming, dancing, and Richard Zhang is going to be leading that with Andrew, and we're talking about folklore and craft on lion dancing, Buddha bubblehead dolls, and things like that. And we will also have a number of people from the community showing crafts, pipe making, clay modeling, those type of things like that, yo-yo stuff. And things like, so it's going to be a fun afternoon, late afternoon, early evening event, targeted for families and young kids. So you guys are all young kids, and we're going to try to have a great time for that. That's coming up at July 7th. July 7th. Okay, and later on that year, we'll have a larger presentation, and that will be on Talk Story in general. We're going to be having a huge event. I hope you also be participating for authors and filmmakers, and we'll be reviewing and talking about the topic of the concept and topic of Talk Story. I think that when I was growing up and she was just a youngster, the Asian American Studies program was trying to get itself established, and the concept of Talk Story, a Hawaii tradition, was the key for Asian American literature at that time. So Frank Chan, Maxine Kingston, all these guys, we're gonna try to get them all together in one place. Okay, so thank you very much. Please remember that this year is the 80th anniversary of the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act under the act called the Magnuson Act. That's December 17th. Sabrina and her team are going to help us have a space over at the Library of Congress for a big celebration. And that's a very significant event, the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act, 80th anniversary. And also this is the 125th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision on Wong Kim Ark, which affirmed birthright citizenship. So we're going to try to have a celebration on those to highlight those two events. That will be December 17th. Mark it on your calendar and be there. Okay. Thank you again so much. Thank you.
Thank you.